Your first year, that includes a second membership free. Plus, you get the award-winning AARP The Magazine.
I love the magazine. Everything in there applies to me.
Benefits for both memberships start instantly. So call or click to join AARP today, and you get this travel bag and AARP The Magazine free.
Call 1-800-411-8550. That's 1-800-411-8550.
Or go to getaarp.org.
What would happen if I had to pick up the phone, call 911 for one of my family members or one of my neighbors? What would I do if no one was on the other end to respond? What if there was no 911? So you can be a part of the solution.
Anybody can be a firefighter. Male, female, younger, older.
We have school teachers. We have leaders in business.
Is me, you, anyone that wants to be.
There is no typical firefighter.
Everybody can make something, because I think everyone has a spark of creativity, and the reason that I have to keep making is because I don't think my life would be as fulfilling without it. If you make things yourself, that means you're not cowering in fear. You're out there taking chances. That, I think, is my way of saying I love you to the world. All right, now I want to hear why you make.
Share your own Why I Make story today. Visit whyimake.org.
Can I give you a hand?
All across the country, people are coming together to speed up what we can learn about health. The All of Us Research Program is calling on 1 million people to join us as we try to change the future of health. For your family, for future generations, for all of us. Visit joinallofus.org and find out how you can become 1 in a million.
Yes. Oh, hi. I suppose you're wondering what an A-list celebrity like me is doing in a place like this. You must know, I'm saving the world. Oh, hi, Beth. Yep, saving the world again. Did you know that 40% of all the food produced in the United States is thrown away? That means everything that went into that food, the pesticides, the water, the land, was all for nothing. Just look at this perfectly good food thrown in the trash. The pizza with extra Cheerios, with these goldfish and Band-Aid tacos. And just look at this perfect trash burger. This pasta dog looks delicious.
You don't have to dumpster dive like Ed Begley Jr. to save the planet. Fight food waste by shopping smart and using what you buy before it gets trashed.
That's way better. Ooh, arugula.
Do your part and find out other world-saving tips at betterthaned.org.
And I approached, along with 3 other officers, the driver's door of the vehicle.
And what was the make and model of this vehicle?
It was a white PT Cruiser.
What was the tag for the vehicle?
It was Delta Echo Romeo Papa 27.
Okay. What happened?
At this point, the gentleman that was in the vehicle was hands on the steering wheel, looking straight ahead, not responding to any commands that the officers were giving him at the time. He refused to unlock the door. He refused to exit the vehicle. At this time, an officer, Souza, made a decision to smash out the glass to try to remove the subject from the vehicle.
Which St. Petersburg officers were there with you?
The officers from St. Pete were Officer Gillis and Officer Laberte and Officer Souza.
Okay.
Along with myself.
And where were you in relationship to the defendant who's sitting in the vehicle?
I was at the driver's side mirror by the front fender at that point, and the other officers were in between me and the rear of the car.
Okay. So what happened after Officer Sousa broke the window?
After the window was broke, the defendant still did not respond to commands. We tried to extract him from the car. At that point, his seatbelt was still attached, and we could not extract him from the car.
Okay. Was this a tense situation?
Yes, very intense. People were still yelling commands at him the whole time. He was still holding on the steering wheel and was refusing to let go.
What happened?
At this point, we realized that the seatbelt was still buckled on, and we had to have somebody come in from the passenger side to unbuckle the seatbelt because none of us could reach it from the driver's side.
And what happened after the seatbelt was unbuckled?
Once the seatbelt was released, we were able to extract the subject through the window of the car, put him on the ground, and get him in handcuffs.
And what was the reason they just didn't open the door from the exterior of the vehicle? Was the vehicle locked?
The vehicle was locked, but at that point, with the situation being intense, and with him still holding on to the steering wheel, that he was pulled through the window of the car with it being smashed out.
And what happened after he was pulled out?
He was pulled out.
Office and transporting him.
He was very quiet, non-emotional, except for a couple of times he would almost appear to be trying to make himself to.
Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber, and this is legal news you can use. So we all hit a rough patch at one point or another. There's no shame in admitting that. Many times it concerns money, and maybe you're having trouble staying afloat. So our topic today is, when should you consider filing for bankruptcy? Bankruptcy is for those who can't fulfill their financial obligations and need a do-over. But bankruptcy is reserved for only those extreme situations, and a court is going to look at the following. You've tried but failed to work out a settlement with your creditors. You've turned to consumer credit counseling, but it hasn't resulted in a solution. A court ordered that your wages be seized or garnished to satisfy your debts. You have outstanding medical bills that you just can't pay. You either don't have assets or not enough to pay off your debts, or your savings account, if you have one, is not going to help either. Okay, so you want to declare bankruptcy, but which kind? There are two that apply to individuals. Chapter 7, where your assets that can be sold off by a court will be in order to pay off your debts. This includes clothing, jewelry, artwork, or property. Or Chapter 13. Now, this option is better for people who have a steady income because here you just reorganize your debts and develop a plan to pay back over time. There are a lot of advantages to filing for bankruptcy. Namely, your creditors will stop coming after you, and in certain cases, you won't have to repay some of your debt at all. But remember, bankruptcy can seriously hurt your credit score, and it doesn't relieve you of having to pay specific debts like alimony, taxes, child support, or mortgage payments. So before you file, consult with an attorney first. For more legal news you can use, go to lawandcrime.com.
Hi there. You might wonder what a famous Hollywood celebrity like me is doing reading in the dark. Is this some new sort of Hollywood method acting? No, this is quite real. Did you know that Americans use about 4 times as much energy per year as the global average? We waste energy left and right.
Attorney, that's pretty tough. Problem, yeah. I think you have a problem. I mean, I think that making yourself cry, first of all, I would say it's difficult for the officer to know someone is making themselves cry. I mean, what does that really mean? I would have liked to have heard more testimony about what made him think that he was making himself cry. Was he, rubbing his eyes or, acting histrionically? I'm not sure. But I think that certainly indicates that he's not insane. He's someone who's being strategic. Even the statements that he made that I didn't know what I did wrong, I just dropped her into the water, and boy, you don't know what a tough time I've been going through. I mean, those statements I don't think speak to insanity. They speak to plotting.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was actually going to ask you that question. Those statements, those spontaneous statements that we obviously just heard in the courtroom, it seemed to kind of almost, you could use them both ways, I guess, but the fact that he said, I dropped her instead of I threw her, I mean, it seems like he's trying to make an excuse, and I think you're right. That doesn't feel like insanity.
No, and also I think that parsing out throwing and dropping someone when the result is the same is pretty bizarre. It seems to me that this man is more intelligent than he's letting on. A lot of the actions that he had that day, I think, could very easily be construed by the prosecution as someone who was deliberately planning to make some sort of excuse for something that he intentionally was trying to do. He was trying to kill his child to get back at his mother and the mother of his child.
Well, that's certainly the story the prosecution is weaving. The ultimate question that the jury will have to answer: insane or evil? Right now, the defense continues to put on their case while we wait for them to come back from lunch. Make sure to stick with us. You don't want to miss a minute. We do have to go to a break, but don't go anywhere. Welcome back. The Lindsay Parton trial is back in the courtroom. We're not going to waste any time. We're going to go there live. This is the emergency room doctor who treated Hannah. Take a listen.
Very briefly, if you can, what are the different things considered for the Glasgow Coma Scale, how you measure that, and how you said there was a Glasgow Coma Scale of 6. So what that means and how you came to that.
I'm going to review the record.
Sure.
It has 3 parts. Number 1 is the eye response, and number 2 is verbal response, and then motor response.
Okay. And what is the lowest score you can get on that scale?
A 3.
And what do you have to do to get the score of 3? Or what does the patient appear to look like with a score of 3?
Completely unresponsive.
Okay. And you noted a Glasgow Coma Scale of 6.
Okay.
If you could explain, you talked about the different things that you look at, the 3 different things. How are those scored? Where do the numbers come from?
Sure.
And what scores did Hannah get in the emergency room?
Sure. So she had no spontaneous eye opening, so that's a 1 on a scale of 4. So the highest you would get is a 4, which is a spontaneous eye opening. She had a 1 for verbal response, which is no verbal response, and she had a 4 to motor response, which is a withdrawal from pain.
So that's how we got to a 6 at that point in time.
Correct.
All right. Now, you talked about your overall view of her appearance. Did you then do a physical exam of her body?
Yes.
And could you describe anything that you noted in your physical exam of her body?
I have to review the record.
All right. Thank you.
So it looks like
While it's reading, if maybe the witness could be instructed to tell us what page it would be helpful for me to follow his reviewing the records.
Sure.
Doctor, when you get to that point where you find that, if you could just tell us what page of the records that's on.
So on page 6 at the top it says right side mandibular area with ecchymosis, superficial abrasion, contusion, and the chin appears with contusion, ecchymosis.
Okay. Contusion, what does that mean?
Bruising.
And I think you said ecchymosis, that's also bruising? So just 2 different words, or is there a difference between ecchymosis and contusion?
No, just the same.
Okay. And you also said abrasion. What are you talking about with abrasion? What is an abrasion?
There's a breakage of the skin.
Did you do an evaluation of the eyes of Hannah Weshy?
Yes.
And go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Also on page 6.
Also on page 6, thank you.
Right pupil approximately 4 to 5 millimeter, non-reactive. Left pupil approximately 3 to 4 millimeter and sluggishly reactive. The conjunctiva is normal. Periorbital ecchymosis or bruising left, worse than the right, with no crepitus and bilaterally no deformities. Fundus exam showing blood bilaterally.
All right, and we had a lot of medical terms in there, so I just want to make sure that we understand what you're talking about.
Sure.
All right, and when you say right pupil, you're giving a measurement 4 to 5 millimeter, that's the measurement of the pupil?
Correct.
When you say sluggishly reactive, what are you talking about? What do you do to make that measurement or determination?
Reaction to light response.
And So could you explain, just in case there's some of those of us that maybe don't understand what that means or what the eye is supposed to do?
Sure. So in a dark area, the pupil dilates, and you shine a light in there, the pupil will constrict. And so when we shine a light in, we kind of look at how it reacts.
Okay. And so in this instance with Hannah, did her pupils react when the light was shined in her eye?
Looks the right did not, the left very slowly.
Okay. And is that abnormal?
Object.
Coach.
The court is going to a sidebar right now as we listen to Dr. Wen on the stand, the emergency room doctor who treated Hannah for her injuries. I want to bring in Catherine Smith to talk a little bit about this. This is so difficult because as we sit here and we listen on an arm's length, I mean, we're watching it on a monitor, we're watching it on TV. What's the jury feeling as they hear about these horrific injuries on this little 3-year-old girl?
It's really tough. It's emotional content. I mean, I think that we'll be looking forward to hearing the medical examiner break down a little bit more and out of medicalese and into English what exactly these injuries mean. But from what I've heard so far, we have bruising to her head on both sides, around her chin, abrasions. I mean, I know that the defendant said that these were caused by a fall, and I anticipate we're going to hear more testimony that that is inconsistent with the fall.
Yeah, this is going to be a heavy expert case because it's all about how these injuries were actually caused, the nature and extent of the injuries. But this testimony, from a trial perspective, this is some of the most critical testimony we're going to hear. The emergency room doctor, this is the person who treated Hannah when she first came to the emergency room. So this is going to be a really big piece of the puzzle, right?
Absolutely. And also, this is one person that can't be argued as biased. This is not an expert that's been paid to testify for either the prosecution or the defense. This is someone who, unsolicited, was actually the treater of the victim. So this is big testimony. And obviously, these are going to be the injuries that any subsequent experts rely upon to establish a timeline. We have a murky timeline in this case. And also to causation, to really what caused those injuries.
You're right. And Catherine, that's something that I've been struggling with as we research and pull together all the information for this case, is that the timeline really has not quite been pinned down yet. Obviously, that will come as the trial continues to unfold and we put together all of the pieces. But isn't that going to be one of the most critical elements of this case, that timeline? That's what the jury is really going to need to focus on.
100%. Whenever you have a case that involves mostly circumstantial evidence, the timeline is critical because, then you can establish alibis and, really pinpoint who was with the child during the time that these injuries were alleged to have occurred. We have the 911 tape where the defendant said that the victim had fallen, I think, a day before. And then we have other testimony that said it was a few days before. So this timeline is very critical in unraveling what happened to this poor child.
Yeah, that's going to be a really big piece. Now, as far as this emergency room doctor, you touched on it a little bit before, but I'd like to explain a little bit to our viewers because expert testimony can get a little bit confusing. When experts take a look, whether they're for the prosecution or the defense, it's these medical records that are going to stand at the center, correct? And then it's going to be an interpretation based on the emergency room records, potentially any prior medical records that Hannah may have, records along with forensic records relating to the scene and all that. So this is really going to be the nucleus, though, right? This ER report.
100%. You're going to hear in this trial and other trials, all the experts can only testify to the full extent of the records that they reviewed and the treatment that they had with the victim, if any. And here, I don't think that there's any evidence that they treated them. We're just relying on the emergency room.
So only time will tell as it unfolds. Well, look, someone's back on the stand, so let's hear more from Dr. Wen.
You also talked about a fundus exam. What is a fundus exam?
Where we looked at the back of the eye.
Okay. And you noted what with that fundus exam?
There was blood bilaterally.
And how do you do a fundus exam?
With a ophthalmoscope, and looking directly in the back of the eye.
Okay. And I know that, we're using a lot of medical terms. You said a ophthalmoscope. Is that what you just
Yeah.
Okay. It's probably hard in non-medical terms, but as simply as you can, explain what that is.
It's a light instrument that we look through.
Okay. Thank you. Did you do a further view of Hannah below her head?
Yes.
And what did you observe there?
I have to review the record.
All right. And if you could tell us what page you're on?
Sure. Do you only want the abnormalities or everything?
Things that you noted that would be of significance to you
Okay.
in your treatment.
On page 6, under the thorax and lungs, there are multiple contusions on the anterior chest area. The ribs were non-tender to palpation, no step-offs, and no deformities or crepitus.
All right. If I may approach the witness with State's Exhibits 41, 44, 46, and 50.
It's the one that's already in. Yeah, I think that's it. 4 seconds.
If you can go ahead and take a look at those.
I think you're going to rule this, but
We are live in the pardon courtroom. Some testimony by the emergency room doctor who treated Hannah. We do have to go to a break, but make sure to stick with us. We won't miss a second of this trial. Dr. Wen, the emergency room doctor in the Parton case is on the stand. We're going to go back live to the courtroom.
I'm going to go back to 44 just so we can talk about, you circled on 44. What part did you circle on 44?
The chin.
And on 41, which parts did you circle?
The chest and the eyes and the cheek and the chin.
Okay. Finally, State's Exhibit 50. All right, and what are you circling there?
The bruising on the chest.
Based on your observations of Hannah Wesche, what treatment did you deliver?
I have to review my record.
All right.
So the patient presented to the emergency department with an unresponsiveness, which with evaluation upon arrival with a Glasgow Coma scale of 6, on page 11, she was not protecting her airway, unresponsive, and at this time suspecting head injury. A decision was...
I'll object to the reading. It's a question, not reading from the document. That's my objection.
I'll address it and I'll restart this.
All right, well,
Doctor, if you can, our request is you can use those to use the records to refresh your recollection.
Sure.
But then testify as to them after you've refreshed your recollection.
Sure.
So if you could go ahead and look at that. And your testimony does not need to be verbatim, just your understanding of it after refreshing your recollection.
Okay. So she arrived in the emergency department unresponsive. She wasn't protecting her airway, so made the decision to intubate and put her on the ventilator.
And when you say intubate, what do you do to intubate?
I put a breathing tube down her throat and help her breathe.
Did you administer any other type of treatment or medication?
We gave her medication to facilitate the intubation.
Okay. During intubation, could you have caused any of the injuries that we've previously seen that you circled?
Absolutely not.
Would that have caused any injuries on Hannah during the intubation externally?
No.
Did Hannah ever require CPR while at Fort Hamilton Hospital?
No.
Did you contact any outside hospital for assistance in treatment with Hannah?
Yes.
And who did you contact?
Cincinnati Children's Emergency Department.
And based on that contact, what was your plan of care?
We were to intubate her and set up for a air care transport to their emergency department.
And then did you do that?
Yes.
While at Fort Hamilton Hospital, did you order any additional screening?
Yes.
What did you order?
A CT of her head, her neck, and her face.
And did you remain with Hannah as those were completed?
Yes.
And were those completed then that morning on March 8th?
Yes.
What time did air care arrive?
I have to look at the record.
All right. Doctor, if I may assist you in locating that, page 15 of those records.
Appears that it was documented at March 8, 2018 at 08:34 a.m.
All right, so a little more than 45 minutes that Hannah would have been at the hospital?
Yes.
Did you note anything about Hannah's condition? Did it remain the same? Did it change throughout that 45 minutes at the hospital?
She remained the same.
Jack, I think that goes to the expert fact witness.
Up to this point, I can't rule out that this would be based on observations only, so I'll overrule the objection at this point.
I'll listen to it and follow up.
Thank you.
Did her condition deteriorate?
No.
Were there any changes in her vital signs?
Not that I'm able to recall.
Doctor, in completion of your treatment, do you document within those records a summary of what your treatment and care was?
Yes.
Would page 11 have that summary on it?
Yes.
If you could take a moment to look at that to see if there's anything that you noted that would help refresh your recollection.
Appears the patient's heart rate was slowly dropping.
All right. So at 8:34, when air care arrived, was care then passed on to a different hospital?
The emergency room doctor is still on the stand. There were some autopsy photos shown some photos from the emergency room shown in the courtroom. We weren't able to show them on air, but they were definitely heartbreaking. I want to bring in my panel to talk about this. We have Catherine Smith, who's been with me this afternoon, and I want to welcome Judge Brandon Birmingham. Judge, let's start with you. So we spoke while the court was in session that you've actually handled cases like this before. Tell us what the jury is looking at and what the jury is really paying attention to as this case unfolds.
Well, you can see now what they're doing. The prosecution is laying out a constellation of injuries. First through the emergency room doctor. It sounds like the child was then transferred to another hospital in Cincinnati where I'm sure she saw another doctor. And ultimately, you're going to have the forensic pathologist who's going to testify. They're all going to say that there's a constellation, a number of injuries, a universe of injuries that did not happen naturally, and you're going to look for the word pathognomonic. Are these injuries pathognomonic for child abuse? The jurors are going to be listening to that. They're going to see what these injuries are. They're going to be able to judge for themselves whether the explanation provided by the defendant, maybe on the 911 call or maybe through the defense, is going to be able to successfully explain it. And that's the question. That's what the prosecution's case is going to rest on.
Yeah, Judge, that's all great points. And we've seen already, as we've just heard opening statements and as we've seen the first witnesses on the stand, of course, we know there's going to be a lot of expert testimony in this case. Catherine, let me turn to you to talk a little bit about that. So we're going to see a lot of experts, as the judge just described. It's all about what makes sense at the end of the day, or does the story add up with what the meds say? We know that the defense is looking to bring a really notable pathologist in on the stand. So where do you really see this going? Is the jury going to be hanging on to this expert testimony, or is this just a really tough case for the defense?
It really depends. I think it is a tough case, but there's a reason that people bring in experts, and there's a reason that you bring in the best experts, because then you can kind of bootstrap on their expertise and try to get them to testify to something favorable. That's what the defense is trying to do. The prosecution, of course, will have their own expert weighing in on the evidence, but as we discussed earlier, all of this is going to hinge on the emergency room records, the photographs, the forensic evidence to put forth a timeline, and also how these injuries were sustained.
Yeah, Judge, Catherine brought up a good point, and we weren't able to show them on air, but we did just see some photographs, and wow, that's something that's very difficult to get over, seeing the photographs of such a young child with the bruises and all. Is that something that's going to be very difficult for the defense to overcome? Because that has a certain shock value.
There is tremendous shock value anytime that a baby is hurt, or a child, a toddler, a 3-year-old. I mean, a toddler may walk around and have bumps and bruises, but I mean, everybody obviously has a special place in their heart for a blameless victim like this. So yes, it is not good for the defense. It is an emotional momentum for the state. The prosecutors in this case writing that, so the defense wants to take this into the realm of science, get away from those pictures. You can't prevent them from being introduced in evidence, and as long as they're relevant. But you want to not let those pictures linger and get right to the science.
Yeah. Well, we'll continue to watch this case. I want both of you to stick with me so we can continue to break this down. We do have to go to a break, but don't go anywhere. We will be back live in the courtroom when we return. going back to the Parton courtroom. The defense is cross-examining Dr. Wen now. Let's go live.
When I asked you inartfully whether or not this represented the full test, these two notations here, what I meant to say, they don't include all of the clues, correct?
No, looks like those are the pertinent positive that they were documenting.
And if there was prior testimony before this jury that represented the full scale, that wouldn't be actually correct, would it?
Well, those were the positive that they found.
But not the ones that were not found. It didn't include all of the clues.
That were positive.
It included the ones that were positive in States Exhibit 1, but did not include the ones that were negative.
Correct.
Okay. What's depicted in your hospital records, and again, we'll show it, does depict the full test, right?
Correct.
And what, I won't have to show it then. You ordered some scans done?
Yes, sir.
All right, but they were interpreted by a radiologist?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You were provided with, I think, four pictures? Yes. I'm going to ask you some questions about those, okay?
Okay.
Those photographs, you didn't take any photographs during your examination and treatment?
No, sir.
All right. You were too busy doing medical stuff and not documenting like pictures, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you don't know who took those photographs?
I don't.
You don't know when those photographs were taken?
I don't.
Can you even say, I mean, you could probably guess, but you don't know where, with first-hand information, those photographs were taken?
No.
You don't know whether or not they were pre- or post-operative?
I don't.
Okay. You don't know what happened to Hannah before the photographs were taken?
I don't know anything happened prior to her arrival.
Or after? After she left your hospital about an hour after she arrived?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But you did observe some bruising?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you did take a history as part of your evaluation with respect to the bruises in some respect?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I know it's been a long time, and I bet you see tons of patients on one day, let alone a year plus later. But do you recollect whether or not you took that history yourself or whether or not a nurse took that history?
We all do it at the same time.
Okay. I appreciate that that's your testimony about what you generally do, but I'm asking specifically, do you have a recollection as to whether or not you took the medical history in this particular case?
I always take the medical history.
All right. And I appreciate that answer, but I'd ask you to listen carefully to what my question is and just answer that, which is, do you have a specific memory of taking the medical history in this particular case?
I remember taking the history, yes.
Okay, so you do.
I always take the history when the patient comes in.
Were you with a nurse or not?
Yes.
Okay. If you have a specific memory, who did you take the history from?
The paramedics.
Okay.
And I think, may I see my note?
Do I have it? Yeah. And of course you can. But before I give it to you, is it fair to say that you don't have an independent recollection without reviewing your notes about who you took the history from? Fair?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to give them to you the way I got them, which is bound up.
Sure. because I tend to mess things up. I hope you can move. Sure.
Did you find it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I found the history on page 44. What page are you on?
Page 4.
Page 4. I saw that. Is it your experience that the same history can be repeated a couple of times in medical records?
Possible.
Okay. We'll look at page 4 and then go over to 44 and then see whether or not it's the same history. I think that it is.
I think it's the same note.
And was it your note or a note of a nurse?
It's my note.
Okay. And at the top of the note is HPI. What does that stand for?
History of present illness.
Okay. And there's 2 paragraphs after that, correct?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm going to show it to the jury if you don't mind, and it'll come up right there. I'm going to zoom back so it can be read.
All right, we're live in the pardon trial. We're going to take a minute before we go to break to talk about some of the testimony that we heard during the cross-examination. Judge, I want to start with you. So you see here the defense actually piggybacked on something we were talking about, and that's these photographs. They took a strategic line of questioning to say, doctor, you don't really know when these were taken, do you? No. You don't know who took them? No. Judge, why was that so important for the defense to do?
They're trying to rebut the prosecution's timeline. The prosecution is trying to take each visible injury that could have contributed to the death of that child and try to explain that it could not have happened unless it was in the care of the defendant. And now if you kind of cast doubt on when was this picture taken, well, I'm not sure. When was this picture taken? I wasn't there. It wasn't my job basically to document injuries. I was there to save a life. You know, those types of questions are trying to throw that timeline into disarray. He may loop back around to that when he calls his expert witness on their side, if they're going to call an expert, or to use it in cross-examination of the state's expert.
Right. Those will be some critical points because at the end of the day, the defense is trying to raise reasonable doubt. Now, Catherine, another issue that came up during the cross is the medical history. There's a lot of questions by the defense attorney. Was it you, doctor, that took this medical history? Well, I usually do. Well, what about in this particular case? Why those distinctions? What's the strategy behind pinning that down at this moment?
I think they're trying to show what he could have personally known from his own examination of the victim versus information that was provided by other medical providers. It seems like they're really trying to parse away and provide some distance between him having any direct knowledge of what happened, the severity of the injuries, and who would it be traceable to the judge's point on the timeline.
Yeah. So, Judge, given that, and I think we're all in agreement that that's where this is ultimately going. It's all about the timeline in this case, and the defense has made that clear from the beginning that that's what the focus is. What matters more, the testimony of this doctor or the records themselves, which essentially say what they say? What's your opinion?
Well, it's the opinions that come after. So if you've got a forensic pathologist, perhaps, or a defense expert, all of their opinions are going to be based on what was written down contemporaneously with the act. The records are very, very valuable now. the jurors are measuring what this witness is saying against what those records say. Jurors tend to believe what's written first, certainly before a trial and things like that. They like pictures, they like stuff that's written down. If the doctor, whatever the doctor is saying, does not match up with what's written down, well, then that's a big problem because it undermines the ultimate opinion that they're giving.
Right. It's all about the consistency and will be all about the interpretation by the experts as we continue to watch this trial unfold. We do have to go to a break, but make sure to stick with us. We will be back live in the courtroom.
If you're over 50, did you know you could be taking advantage of everything AARP has to offer right now? Join today for just $12. Find out what 37 million AARP members already know. Benefits start instantly.
It's AARP.
Are you joining AARP?
Actually, I just did.
But is it worth it?
Well, I enrolled at 7:02, saved on concert tickets at 8:10, read a great article on investing at 9, found a sweet travel deal at 10:15. I used the caregiver finder for my dad, and done. Discounted movie tickets.
Call or go to getaarp.org to join today for just $12, and your second membership is free. And get instant access to discounts on eye care, prescriptions, savings on travel, dining, and deals from top retailers. So many ways to save. Instant resources, tools, and tips to help manage your money, maximize your health, and so much more. AARP is mobile. Get alerts to savings and events near you. And AARP is the largest advocacy group for people over 50. Your voice will be heard.
I love the local retail discounts. AARP absolutely pays for itself.
I'm nowhere near ready to retire, and AARP has been a tremendous resource for that.
I get reliable financial tools and tips.
And we check out the hotels, the dining. AARP saves us a lot of money.
Join today for just $12 for your first year. That includes a second membership free. Plus, you get the award-winning AARP The Magazine.
I love the magazine. Everything in there applies to me.
Benefits for both memberships start instantly. So call or click to join AARP today, and you get this travel bag and AARP The Magazine free.
Call 1-800-411-8550. That's 1-800-411-8550.
Or go to getaarp.org.
live in the Parton trial, and we're going to go back into the courtroom now.
ED arrival at 0744.
$7.44?
Yes, sir.
And were you able to identify from the records the exact time that she left in the air care from your care and from Fort Hamilton Police Hospital?
Patient transferred to air care transport cart. Handoff care at this time. Patient en route to Cincinnati Children's. Timestamp at 0834.
So Hannah was at your hospital from 7:44 to 8:54.
Correct.
Did you observe the handoff to the team that flew her down?
Yes.
One second, and then I think I'm done.
Take your time.
When you took the history from the paramedics, did they indicate to you that they had hurried Hannah away from the scene because they felt that she was unsafe at the scene?
I do not recall.
Do you recollect whether or not they described the mechanism of how they handled her as they took her to the ambulance from the scene?
I don't recall, assuming as fast as possible.
You indicated that based on your exam and part of your treatment, you placed her in a C-collar.
Yes.
That was to stabilize her head.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's because of the head injuries that you observed?
Well, because of the concern for possible head injury.
Gotcha. Would it have, based on what you said, would it have been concerning to you if anyone at the scene had scooped her up while she was in a distress condition?
Define scoop.
Grabbed her without a C-collar, without stabilizing her head.
I can't speak for EMS protocol.
All right. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
Thank you, Judge.
Ms. Holly, you may redirect when you're ready.
Doctor, if the EMTs described scooping up Hannah, having their hand behind her neck and holding her close to them to get her out to the EMS, would that concern you?
Possible.
Okay. And how so?
If she had a neck injury or C-spine injury.
But if it was a head injury, would that cause any issue? As opposed to a neck injury?
I don't know.
Okay. You have the records up there in front of you, correct?
Yes.
Let me approach the witness. Doctor, I'm going to put up State's Exhibit 4, which you've been talking to somewhat at length with counsel. And I have some questions for you. At the top it says ED provider notes 3/8/2018 at 9:23 a.m.
So what page are you on?
I'm sorry, page 4.
Thank you.
Do you see that? Can you
Yes.
see that on the screen? What is that 9:23 a.m.?
I think that's possibly when my note was completed or enter.
Okay. So you would agree with, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Was Hannah at the hospital at that point in time at 9:23 a.m.? You've testified previously that she left at 8:34.
I don't think she was there.
All right. So you believe that's when it was entered into the computer. And I guess let me ask this a different way. Do you enter this information into the computer as the information comes to you? So in the emergency room, as somebody is saying something to you, are you recording this history in the computer?
No.
Are you doing anything to record that history, like an audio recording, anything along those lines?
No.
Do you have a transcriptionist, or are you taking any notes related to that at that point in time?
No.
What are you doing at that point in time?
Listening to the history and taking care of a critically sick patient.
So as this history is coming in, where was Hannah?
Laying on the ER stretcher.
And as the history was coming in, Hannah was there? You said laying on the stretcher. So was she in the room with you when this history was coming in? That's what I wanted
Yes.
to say. All right. And being in the room with you, where was your focus at that point in time?
Right, we're continuing testimony from the ER doctor who treated Hannah. This is the redirect. Judge, let me start with you. We can see that the prosecution is focusing on certain aspects, of course, trying to undercut where the defense attempted to poke holes. What's the most important takeaway from all of this testimony of the ER doctor?
I think what we get now is we see maybe another emerging theory. The lawyer was questioning the doctor about the actions of the father and who was around the child right before. And now we're starting to point at the father. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the rest of the trial. What they're saying is if you have this is not murder, that this was a shortfall, well, that means it wasn't a homicide. But by saying the father had access, maybe they're also saying that not only was it not a homicide, but the father, if it was murder, it was the father who did. So they're really presenting two different theories.
Yeah, Judge, no, absolutely. That makes sense. I think I agree with you. And Catherine, you and I said the same thing sitting here. We were wondering, all of this, the fathers with them right before, there seems to be a thread that's being pulled here. What do you make of that?
I do. I mean, I think that a very valid theory for the defense, and maybe one of the best, is that the babysitter was not in custody of the child immediately preceding her collapse. The father dropped off the child, and then she experienced this unconsciousness. So, if I were the defense, I would point the fingers on the father. Stay tuned for that.
Yeah, it's always good to have an alternate theory to present to the jury, although it's not a requirement. It certainly helps to have somebody else in there that could cast that shadow of a doubt. Unfortunately, I have to say goodbye to my brilliant panel. Catherine Smith, thank you for joining me. Judge Brandon Birmingham, always a pleasure. Make sure to stick with us. We're going to be back live in the courtroom after the break. are live in the Parton courtroom right now on the stand. Radiologist Marguerite Correa. Take a listen.
You can do interventional radiology, mammography, ultrasound. And so we do specialty training in those areas. And then I did a fellowship, which is after residency, you do more specialized training. So some people will do musculoskeletal, cardiac imaging, fetal imaging. I did pediatric radiology. And then I did the additional year in pediatric neuroradiology. So I did that at Children's, where I do, so basically I do brain, spine, kind of head and neck. That's sort of my area.
All right, so you're saying pediatric radiology, you're talking about radiology of children.
Correct.
Is that
Yes.
children of all ages?
Yes. I mean, we actually see a fair amount of adults as well that have pediatric diseases that go on to complex congenital heart disease patients that may now be 50 years old or can be seen at Children's as well. So, but yes. So we see all pediatric aged patients as well as patients with pediatric diseases.
And you talked about CT, MRI, and specifically let's talk about those. I think you named a few other things, but I think specific to this case. What is a CT?
So CT is it's sort of a fancy X-ray. It's CAT scan, computed tomography, and so it allows us to see inside a child's brain and look at the actual brain structure. Where if I took an X-ray of you, you would actually just see more of the skull, like you would see a skeleton. The CT allows us to see inside. We can look at the inside structures of the brain, the soft tissues of the neck, the chest, abdomen, wherever we do the CT imaging.
Okay. And in comparison to an MRI, what is an MRI?
So an MRI is even a fancier tool that we use for imaging. It's magnetic resonance imaging. It allows us to see, again, inside, and we do that sort of on different, kind of depending on what the symptoms are. A child that comes to the emergency room that we need a quick study, that we're trying to look for, let's say, trauma, the kid's vomiting, we're worried about a mass. We may do a CT scan because it's a quick study. It can be done within, a couple of minutes versus an MRI. If anyone's had an MRI, it can take 45 minutes to an hour to do. It's just a more specialized study looking at the soft tissues.
Okay. Do you have any board certifications?
Yes, so I'm boarded by the American Board of Radiology, and then I have certification in pediatric radiology.
And do you have to do anything to maintain those certifications?
Yes, that's what I was saying. We have to do additional CME, continuing medical education, as well as we have to fulfill other requirements to do those. That sort of runs on a 10-year time period. I did it for one time where I had to take a certification board exam. It has since changed and it's evolved some. So now we do online questions. I get questions sent to me on a weekly basis that we have to pass a certain number of those online questions per year.
And thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. What is your current position?
I'm a staff neuroradiologist, Cincinnati Children's.
And how long have you been at Cincinnati Children's Hospital?
I started my fellowship in 1997. I've been there ever since. I was faculty, I think, in like 2000, April of 2000, somewhere around there, so about 20 years.
Do you have any teaching responsibilities?
Yes, Children's is a teaching institution, so we have, within our program, we see the residents and fellows. We have fellows actually assigned to our program, so again, these are post-medical school, post-residency people that are doctors that are learning about pediatric radiology. We have University of Cincinnati residents that rotate with us, and then we see all the subspecialties kind of rotate through our department, as well as the medical students from UC's medical school.
In addition to those teaching responsibilities, have you had the occasion to create scholarly articles that are peer-reviewed and published?
Yes. So I'm pretty much I prefer to do clinical medicine beyond the service, but I certainly have done. I do lectures. I've done some lectures at national meetings. I do some research. Child abuse, abusive head injury is one of the areas. I've also done some work on tuberous sclerosis. I kind of get, some of that work, yes.
Okay. And I'm sorry, that last word I kind of lost. You said you did tuberous.
It's tuberous sclerosis.
Okay,
So.
thank you. What is that?
So it's a disorder that can have skin findings, brain findings. It's I've worked with some of the neurologists that I know. They were sort of the main people, so they could have certain kinds of brain tumors. So I helped them assess the brain tumors.
Okay. So a short, fancy way of saying brain tumors, is that what we're talking about? With the...
In that specific disorder, yes.
Okay, thank you. During the course of your duties at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, do you evaluate patients?
To be honest, the radiologists, we don't really see patients. Like if you come into the radiology department to get a chest x-ray or a CT scan, mostly who you're going to deal with are technologists who are the imagers. And then we basically, everything is sort of sent to a computerized PACS system or picture system where we kind of sit in a separate room and review the imaging. So there are times when I do see patients, but in general I don't typically see patients. I used to do more interventional procedures where I would do lumbar punctures or cerebral angiograms, so I would see those patients. Occasionally I will talk to a patient if a child comes in and maybe we discover that the child has a brain tumor. I may go talk to the family and meet the child that way, but in general, radiologists often don't see patients.
Okay. You're looking at scans of the patient, not the actual patient. Is
Correct.
That what you're saying?
Yes.
And so when you're asked to review scans, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what types of scans or for what reasons are you looking at these scans?
So I do, like I said, I do neuroradiology, so a couple of us work per day. We look at the CT and MRI studies that come across, and we see lots of different things. We see kids with seizures, infections, kids that might have been in car accidents. We see kids that come in with vomiting or headache that may turn out to have brain tumors. We see a lot of neuro-oncology patients, brain tumor patients at Cincinnati Children's. So kids that have seizure disorders, epilepsy, so lots of different things.
Doctor, have you previously testified in a courtroom?
Yes.
Have you previously been declared an expert in the field of pediatric radiology?
Yes.
In what courts?
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to. I've been here in Butler County, I've been in Hamilton County, and then in Kentucky. And to be honest, I'm not sure I can even tell you what county that was in Kentucky.
All right. Doctor, at some point did you provide the state of Ohio with a curriculum vitae, which is basically a summary of your education, experience, and training that you received?
Yes.
Publications that you've done?
Yes.
If I may approach the witness with State's Exhibit 11. Are you able to recognize that exhibit?
It's a copy of my CV, yes.
True and accurate copy of that?
Yes.
As you're looking at that, I know that there's a number of pages, but do you see any glaring additions or corrections that need to be made in that?
No.
Move to admit State's Exhibit 11.
Any objection from the defense?
Does not.
All right, Exhibit 11 will be admitted.
Your Honor, at this time, the state requests that Dr. Cray be qualified as an expert in the area of pediatric radiology.
Mr. Pager, do you wish to voir dire the witness any further on qualifications?
Non-qualifications.
All right, the court will find her so qualified to testify as an expert in pediatric radiology. You may proceed.
Doctor, pursuant to your duties as a pediatric radiologist with Cincinnati Children's Hospital, did you evaluate any radiology images of Hannah Weshy, date of birth 1/11/2015?
Yes.
And were records developed as a result of Hannah Weshy's treatment at Cincinnati Children's, which began on March 8th of 2018?
Yes.
I can hand you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 8.
Yes. What the numbers Thank you.
This is Marguerite Carré, a doctor, a radiologist, discussing some of the results of Hannah's medical records. Now, certainly all of these medical records are going to be a focal point of the case. Right now, we heard the prosecutors laying the foundation, why qualifying Dr. Carré to testify. That's important to get all of that out there first and required by the court. Then what we're going to see is this trial unfolds. All of these medical records being analyzed and interpreted by experts for both sides. So there is a lot to come in this trial. And all of this medical testimony is going to be the most important part of this trial moving forward. So don't go anywhere. We do have to go to a break, but you don't want to miss anything, and we will be back live in the courtroom. Parton courtroom is still active. We're going to continue to watch live testimony of Dr. Marguerite Carré, a radiologist. Take a look.
That's not uncommon that I would interpret an outside study.
And is everybody able to hear the witness in the jury? All right, I was just double checking. I apologize.
Lost my train of thought for a second. That's all right. So you said you do a follow-up evaluation, and on this morning, or you do a follow-up analysis, something separate from what was done at the prior hospital.
Right.
And I think you alluded to it, but I just kind of want to understand, in this specific instance, why did you review those records? What was the purpose of you reviewing those records and doing your own follow-up on March 8th?
So the child was being sent to Cincinnati Children's, so we were reviewing them, trying to figure out what was going on in the scan so that the neurosurgeon knew. I mean, the neurosurgeon had been notified that the child was coming so that we could talk to the neurosurgeon about the findings on the CT scan. And then again, that's put into our system, and then we generate our own report.
And so, prior to coming to court today, did you prepare a PowerPoint presentation to discuss the findings that you saw
Yes.
in Hanawashee?
Yes.
If I may approach the witness with State's Exhibits 12 through 18.
Thank you.
Doctor, are you able to recognize those?
So these are copies of the slides that I prepared.
And within those slides, are there images from the CT of Hanawashee?
Yes.
Are those true and accurate images as you reviewed them?
Yes.
At this time, the state of Ohio moves to admit and publish State's Exhibits 12 through 18.
Mr. Pagan?
That's just what I saw, Kelly?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. No objection.
All right, State's Exhibits 12 through 18 will be admitted.
And it's going to take me just a second to pull that up. Doctor, starting.
We now see the doctor being questioned about certain x-rays and her interpretation of the results. Again, while some of this medical testimony can seem difficult to get through, this is all going to lay the foundation for the prosecution's entire argument and also for the defense. Let's go back to court and listen.
Image
You
or
can
no?
actually touch it and it will mark it.
Okay.
So you can go ahead and touch to whatever you're talking about.
Okay, so these are actually three. So a CT scan basically is, like I was describing, as an X-ray, not an X-ray. It's radiation basically, but we're able to look inside and look at the child's brain, and then we can display them different ways. So these are actually displayed almost like if you have a loaf of bread. It's a slice. We can kind of make slices all the way up the head. We can do them in this direction. We can do them in that direction. We can actually make 3D reconstructions of the skull or the soft tissues. And so we can kind of generate different imaging depending on how we look. This is sort of our standard way to look at the brain. We call these axial images. So again, they're sort of going this way up through the brain. And so these are actually three separate locations in the child's brain. And this is from the head CT that was performed at Fort Hamilton Hospital and then put into our system that morning. It was done, I guess, looks around 8 o'clock in the morning at Fort Hamilton. And so on the initial study right here, on the initial image that I have, the one on this side, these are actually the markers that were put in by Fort Hamilton. It's showing the child's brain here.
Are you marking on the screen?
Is it not doing anything?
Push. Don't worry about being gentle with it. Just
Okay. If you use your fingernail more.
until you see it.
Oh, okay.
Here, and I'll
Okay.
cut that off. Go ahead.
So this is the child's brain in here. Is it working?
Yes, it is.
Oh, now I've got scribble all over.
Do you want me to clear it out?
Sure.
I'll let you start again.
Okay, so on that image, what that's showing is the line going down the middle is showing where the ventricles or the fluid spaces that we all have in the brain should normally be located. And you can see that these are the fluid spaces that are the dark spaces off to the side. Well, let's just go back to starting with the basics. So this is the bone. The white area out here is the child's bone. The inside here is the child's brain. And then we'll get to the bleed here in a minute. which is this portion over here. So what we're trying to look for is we look for sort of symmetry between the two sides. When we look at imaging, this is the right side of the body and the left side of the body. We always sort of look at our imaging like we're looking at the patient, and so it sometimes gets a little confusing as to which side we're on. So the child's brain is being pushed over to the left side, and there's this area outside of the brain that's in the subdural space, and that's moderately sized collection that's got high attenuation or bright white. High attenuation is something that we see with hemorrhage that's recently occurred. It's got some areas of dark in it. So to me, this is a subdural hemorrhage that's occurred that's causing mass effect on the brain and kind of pushing the brain over. This is just an image. The second image is just higher up. And then this is an image even higher up, sort of more at the top of the child's brain. Again, showing areas of kind of white or subdural hemorrhage outside the child's brain. And then this is actually the brain itself here. Do you want me to keep going, Joe?
Is there anything else that we should talk about in this slide?
So the significance here is when we see bleeding outside the brain, a couple of the big things, when I see this on a study, I need to quickly get a hold of someone. To me, this baby's brain is being pushed. Someone needs to either do something to relieve that pressure, take off that bleeding, or do something, because as the brain continues to get pushed, it can cause significant problems. The child can have significant hypoxic ischemic injury related to that shift. Bleeding outside of the brain, we see that in different settings. Certainly trauma is going to be the most common thing. When we see bleeding in the subdural location, we think trauma. It's not the only cause of subdural hemorrhage in a child, but it's the most common. The other thing is, and we will go on to look at another child that's similar age, the brain attenuation, or sort of the colors, I call them colors, that's sort of shades of gray. The child's brain is kind of subtly indistinct to me, suggesting that there's already kind of some issues going on in the child's brain at this time.
Okay. I want to go back and try to understand some of the things that we're talking about. Number one, we're talking about a subdural hemorrhage. What does a subdural hemorrhage mean? Okay, so normally the brain is going to be positioned in the middle of the head, and then we have different spaces where bleeding can occur in the child's head. So we can have bleeding that can actually be in the central fluid spaces, which are these locations here. We can move out a little bit and have what we call subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is this space which we all normally have a subarachnoid space, and it communicates with the spinal fluid or fluid that we normally have. If anyone's ever had a lumbar puncture, that's the fluid they take out. And then we move out a little bit further, and we've got this subdural space, which is sort of, some people talk about it's a potential space where bleeding can occur, which is where this location of the blood is. And we can tell the location by what it appears, the shape of it. It's sort of that crescentic shape. And then if you move out further, we have what we'll call epidural hemorrhage, which classically epidural hemorrhage is going to be sort of confined by the periosteum of the bone. It's more kind of lens shape or biconvex, and it's another type of hemorrhage. So we're actually looking at hemorrhage outside of the child's brain, but within the skull, not actually in the child's substance of the brain. Okay, and so there were a number of different, I think their locations, but I'm hoping you can kind of clarify. Maybe a brain or a head anatomy discussion of what is the subdural space that you're talking about.
So they're just, they're kind of confined by the different membranes that overlie the patient's brain or anyone's brain.
And would that be on the outside or the inside of the skull?
It's on the inside of the skull, so contained within the bone, but outside of the brain.
All right, and when we're talking about layers of, it's not just skin, skull, brain. Is there other things in between?
Well, the meninges, the dura, yes. So,
okay.
I mean, there's vessels, yes. I mean.
All right. And would you mind kind of going through outer to inner, what those different layers are as you're starting from the outside of somebody's head going all the way into the brain? What are those different layers?
Well, so on the imaging, the things that we look for is we look at the scalp. When I first pull up a CT scan, how I sort of approach it is I kind of quick glance at the brain. That's the main concern. Is there something big and bad I need to see on the brain? Do I need to not let someone know what's going on? And then we sort of evaluate the rest of the structures. What's the attenuation or the color of the brain? Is the white matter, the gray matter, the normal color? Is there bleeding? Are the fluid spaces normal? Some people talk about like water on the brain. You have normal fluid spaces in your brain, and sometimes we'll see that those will get too big. Sometimes we'll see that they'll get too small. We'll look at the spaces outside of the brain. Then we want to look at the skull. Are there any fractures? Are there any bone lesions? And then we get to the scalp, where maybe the child's got a soft tissue lesion or soft tissue swelling in the scalp. And so we cover all of those. If I took images down lower, you'd actually see the orbits or eyeballs. And so we look at those as well.
Okay.
So we're sort of evaluating the entire head and all of the structures.
All right. And so you talked about subdural hemorrhage and then also the
Very important and critical testimony by the radiologist, Dr. Carey. I'm just recapping some of it because it was so mind-blowing and so important to this case, talking about bleeding outside the brain, but inside of the skull. And the doctor repeating, when we see bleeding, trauma, trauma, trauma. I mean, this is big testimony. The prosecution getting this on record, getting this out in the courtroom early in the game. The defense, well, we'll only see what they have to say on cross-examination. Again, this case comes down to these medical records, comes down to the expert interpretation. So this is all of the utmost importance and is going to serve as the basis for the whole case moving forward. We do have to go to a break, but make sure to stay with us because more of this critical testimony is coming our way when we go back live to the courtroom. still live in the Parton courtroom with some of this absolutely critical medical testimony. Dr. Correa, the radiologist, still on the stand interpreting these scans of Hannah, the CT scan. So this is really important. We're going to go back live now.
So if a kid comes in and the history is, got hit in the head by a lacrosse ball, I usually will go through and I'll look at the whole scan, but then I'll go back and I'll be like, okay, where did this kid get hit? And I'll kind of make the windows look a little bit different. Oh, it was here, so is there a fracture here? Because if the kid got hit here, we're not going to find a fracture back there. So it kind of guides me to where I need to look and kind of clue in a little bit more.
Following reading these initial CT scans from Port Hamilton and speaking to the neurosurgeon, Dr. Stevenson, did you do a follow-up study?
So Dr. Stevenson took the child to the operating room and evacuated the hematoma, and then the child came back down, which is routine. They come back down and get another study within a certain time period, usually to see now what's going on after they've evacuated the blood. So yes, there is a follow-up.
All right, and States Exhibit 16, I think is.
So this
still
is
the same one.
Yeah, so this is basically, on this side, this is Hannah's image here, and then this is just a normal 3-year-old child that I pulled from our system for a fall. We see lots of kids that come in with falls. This is what the normal 3-year-old brain should look like. The ventricles or the fluid spaces should be here in the center. Again, if you kind of draw a line down the middle, you can see how Hannah's ventricles are pushed off to the side. The left lateral ventricle is actually a little bit smaller. And when I talk about the attenuation or the color of the brain, you can see how it's almost like you've got darker areas centrally. Some of these areas are whiter, and that's sort of the normal appearance of the brain on this side versus on Hannah's. You can see that you don't see those colors or the different blacks, shades of gray quite as nicely.
Doctor, are you able to say what is causing that shift?
Right. So when we see kids with large subdural hemorrhage, certainly the subdural hemorrhage itself can result in the shift. Subdural hemorrhage is typically caused by injury to venous structures, called like bridging veins. You have arteries which supply blood to the brain, and then the veins drain the brain as anywhere else in the body. And so subdural hemorrhage usually results from bleeding or injury to the bridging veins. And so not only do you have the subdural hemorrhage, but if you have injury to those veins, the brain itself is not going to be draining normally as well. And so you can get edema within the brain.
And edema is?
Swelling. Okay. Just like if you injure yourself in your hand and it starts to swell.
Okay. States Exhibit 17. Explain to us what these are showing.
Okay, so these are 3 different images of Hannah. So this was the initial study that we've been looking at, the same pretty much image. This is the initial post-operative study that was done after Dr. Stevenson had done the evacuation, and this was an imaging study that actually one of my colleagues, Dr. Cook, had read on 3/9. This was done the next day, and that's not unusual. Again, we usually will do a couple-day, follow-up just to see what's going on in the child's brain, sometimes depending on how well clinically they're doing. So, again, this is the bleeding here. So now you can see on the initial post-op one here, the skull, which is the white area here, has been resected in this large area here. And now you can see that the brain is what we kind of call herniates, or it kind of protrudes into that. So Dr. Stevenson removed the bone here, was able to drain that hematoma. But because of the swelling in the brain actually herniates out into that defect. If we draw that line down the middle on the initial postoperative study, the shift, what we call midline shift, has relatively resolved, although you can see again that brain is sort of herniating out. But then again, by the following day, you can see, if we kind of draw down that middle, how the brain is shifted over again. You can also see how the attenuation of the brain, you've got more areas of black. Here you've got areas of black as well. And so the child has really ended up having diffuse injury to that right side. And on the left side, I don't think we show all the images I might show.
We have breaking news in the Jonchuck case. We see the defense attorney in this image right here before the judge, bringing to light concerns by the defense attorney that Jonchuck is not competent to stand trial. This is a new development, something we did not anticipate, did not expect. Now, in order to be competent to stand trial, a hearing must be held. The defense is now asking for another competency hearing. The standard is that the defendant must understand the proceedings against them and be able to assist in their own defense. Now, for those of you just catching up, competency was an issue in this case way before the trial. There was a time period where the defendant was deemed incompetent to stand trial. He received treatment, and now we find ourselves in the courtroom with this issue resurrecting. The defense is now arguing before the judge. Do we have audio on this argument? Can we go to the courtroom? We can go to the courtroom now and listen in.
When I asked, who was on the stand, who was giving testimony yesterday that you remember, he said Dr. Mackless, and then was able to revert, then said, oh wait, no, that wasn't right. Dr. Mackless was here on Friday and couldn't recall who was providing testimony yesterday when this happened. So he also today has been displaying inappropriate laughter, which is a symptom that we have come to recognize sometimes when he does appear to be losing touch. And when we questioned him about that, specifically, you just seem like your mood is more elevated today, or is that right? Is everything going on? He had indicated that it was because we were making him laugh and that we were saying funny things to him, specifically Ms. McNeil and myself, and I have only had conversation with him this morning, unfortunately. Basically, good morning, everything go okay in the jail last night? Did you get all your medications? I haven't even had a chance to really speak to him. And additionally, Ms. McNeil had indicated that she also had not had really any small talk with Mr. Jonchuck today. He is insisting that he's completely fine, and that he's not hallucinating. These are things that have actually happened. So he is insisting that everything is fine. We certainly have some concerns at this point.
Let me ask you, did you have any prior concerns about his competency that you didn't express to the court?
No, the first time we became, all of these things are concerning.
Correct.
However, taken each individual one, after the 18th, we believed it seemed to, there was a comment that had happened that had happened Sunday night. We've checked with him every day since. Is there anything unusual in the jail? Is everything going fine? He indicated that it was. Then he had made the one comment during jury selection, I believe it was on Tuesday. After that week went fairly smoothly. We did, however, hire a confidential expert to meet with him to kind of get a baseline in case there was an issue. That doctor indicated to us that it was apparent that there was some trauma associated with Dr. Lazaro, but that he was competent at the time. And so we...
Can I ask you when that occurred?
Which part?
The confidential expert?
Friday morning we met before we started trial. Before we started jury selection. So the first, that Friday of jury selection, I went over there before we started trial.
Okay.
And then last week, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday that we started having the discussion about the expert sitting in. but he became very fixated on who was going to be present in the courtroom. So he had just asked a lot of questions, but hadn't expressed nothing that suggested he was having hallucinations or anything. The two comments with the jurors Friday evening concerned us. We had attempted to have our confidential go evaluate him again yesterday, and due to his status was unable to, and the jail staff at the time, they were unable to let him out to do a confidential evaluation. So our concern arose for the most part if he's hearing statements that the witness testifying is saying.
We have to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. Breaking news in the Jonchuck case. Stay tuned.
If you're over 50, did you know you could be taking advantage of everything AARP has to offer right now? Join today for just $12. Find out what 37 million AARP members already know. Benefits start instantly.
It's AARP.
Are you joining AARP?
Actually, I just did.
But is it worth it?
I enrolled at 7:02, saved on concert tickets at 8:10, read a great article on investing at 9, found a sweet travel deal at 10:15. I used the caregiver finder for my dad, and done. Discounted movie tickets.
Call or go to getaarp.org to join today for just $12, and your second membership is free. And get instant access to discounts on eye care, prescriptions, savings on travel, dining, and deals from top retailers. So many ways to save. Instant resources, tools, and tips to help manage your money, maximize your health, and so much more. AARP is mobile. Get alerts to savings and events near you. And AARP is the largest advocacy group for people over 50. Your voice will be heard.
I love the local retail discounts. AARP absolutely pays for itself.
I'm nowhere near ready to retire, and AARP has been a tremendous resource for that.
I get reliable financial tools and tips.
And we check out the hotels, the dining. AARP saves us a lot of money.
Join today for just $12 for your first year. That includes a second membership free. Plus, you get the award-winning AARP The Magazine.
I love the magazine. Everything in there applies to me.
Benefits for both memberships start instantly. So call or click to join AARP today, and you get this travel bag and AARP The Magazine free.
Call 1-800-411-8550. That's 1-800-411-8550.
Or go to getaarp.org.
We just had breaking news in the Jonchuck trial. The defense requesting a competency hearing, citing concerns about Jonchuck's competency at trial right now. Just to bring everybody up to speed, competency had been an issue when this case first began. So the date of the incident, January 8th, 2015. In February 2015, Jonchuck was found incompetent to stand trial. He then received treatment, ultimately leading up to this trial day where he was deemed competent. Now, as the trial unfolded, the defense was raising concerns. Some of that Law and Crime had been live tweeting about during the trial. We posted about inappropriate laughter by Jonchuck in the courtroom that was observed. That became a focal point and a major part of the defense's statement to the judge of concerns regarding Jonchuck. Other issues that were brought up were concerns about his ability to understand what was going on in the trial with a particular witness. These concerns coming to light and the defense asking for an evaluation. Now, just so everybody is clear, there's a lot of moving parts here. Competency is very different than the insanity defense. Competency means, is this defendant capable of standing trial? The standard is that they understand the charges against them and that they can assist in their own defense. So the analysis is based on their mental state, the defendant's mental state at trial. Now, insanity is a different standard. They did not understand the nature and consequences of their actions and didn't believe they were wrong at the time the incident occurred. So big distinction here. These are two separate issues. The competency hearing was taken just with the attorneys and the judge and the jury was not in the room. So now what happens next? There will be a medical examiner who will evaluate Jonchuck for the competency issue. After that evaluation is complete, we'll see where it goes from there. He will either be remanded for treatment somewhere until he's competent to stand trial, or the trial will continue. But this was an absolute unexpected development in the trial that we broadcast here on Law and Crime. Wow. What a day. Did not see that coming. Continue to follow our Twitter for more updates on the Jonchuck case. Right now, that court is not in session pending the evaluation that we just talked about. So we're going to move back into the babysitter trial. We're going to go back to the Parton case. Well, looks like that they're actually in a sidebar right now. So we're going to take another minute to continue to discuss Jonchuck while we wait for Parton to come back from a sidebar. We'll just take this time to really break this down because this was a big development. There was, if you see the tweet, I want everybody to log on to their Twitter and take a look at some of the photographs that were posted. This is of inappropriate laughter during the trial. Now, you know, here on Law and Crime, we always talk about what is the defendant doing during some testimony? What do they look like? Do they look remorseful? Do they look upset? Do they look angry? Well, this was a moment that we thought would have played into the actual prosecution and defense, but actually it was something brought up by the defense attorney for competency. The babysitter case is back. We don't want you to miss a minute of that trial, so we're going back live to the courtroom.
I also am a member of the child abuse team at Cincinnati Children's, and so I've also reviewed it at that. As far as my opinion, I pretty much knew.
We actually lost our feed in the trial, but we're keeping an eye on it. We will make sure to get back into the babysitter case as soon as possible. Again, just to talk a little bit about what we saw today, it is very telling when you look at these pictures posted on Twitter of Jonchuck sitting there, not having a normal reaction, this inappropriate laughter. Certainly, it appears that that was a primary point that raised concerns for his defense attorney. Now, competency is a huge issue. The court, it's in everyone's interest, the court, the prosecution, the defense, to ensure that there's an evaluation done for the defendant to stand trial, to ensure that they're competent to stand trial. If that's not done, if there's a question mark about that, you could have a whole lot of issues. You could have overturned verdicts. You could have all sorts of issues on appeal. So it's in everyone's best interest to get this done right in the beginning. It's everyone's right. So that's why we didn't see in that hearing, or excuse me, in the exchange between the defense and the judge, we didn't see anybody waving their arms and saying no way from the prosecution, because again, it's in everybody's best interest to ensure the defendant is competent. While we wait to get back live into the babysitter case courtroom, we do want to play an update on R. Kelly. Take a look.
When you get in bed with fleas, this is what happens.
R. Kelly's defense attorney in court Monday seeking to play offense. Steve Greenberg wants to shift scrutiny away from his client and on to dealings between Cook County prosecutors and controversial attorney Michael Avenatti. Greenberg filed a motion to require all communication preserved between prosecutors and Avenatti, who is representing some of R. Kelly's alleged victims.
Right to a fair trial requires that they all be preserved at this point.
Both Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx and Avenatti are under newfound public scrutiny, and Greenberg is seeking to capitalize on that.
We've already seen that State's Attorney Foxx has conversations with people about pending cases, pending investigations. I want to know what conversations she had with Avenatti about this case.
Foxx has been under fire for her handlings of the drop charges against actor Jussie Smollett. Allegations have been raised that she interfered on his behalf, despite claiming she had recused herself from the case.
I don't think that the Jussie Smollett situation is going to impact R. Kelly's trial. I think what it shows us is how this office operates.
Avenatti is also facing his own legal trouble. He was indicted last week by federal prosecutors in New York and Los Angeles. He's accused of extorting sportswear company Nike and separately of embezzling funds from a legal settlement and avoiding taxes. Law&Crime host and former prosecutor Bob Bianchi did not mince words.
If these allegations are true, if this was done for the purest reason, and the prosecutor is now compromised, they've compromised the very victims that they are sworn to protect.
R. Kelly has vehemently denied the sexual assault charges against him.
I didn't do this stuff. This is not me. I'm fighting for my life. Y'all killing me with this.
The judge in Kelly's case did not rule on the motion. The next court date will be on May 7th, and R. Kelly will be required to attend. For the Law&Crime Network, I'm Rachel Stockman.
Thank you, Rachel, for that update. Interesting twists and turns in the R. Kelly case every day. We're keeping an eye on it, and we will keep you informed. Also today, big day on Law and Crime. We had breaking news on the Jonchuck case, defense requesting a competency hearing. We're also waiting to get back into the courtroom live for the babysitter case. That's the Parton case. That should have some more exciting twists and turns and a lot of medical evidence coming our way, which is going to serve as the basis for that case. You want to make sure to stick around. Unfortunately, my time here is done, but the wonderful Linda Kenny Baden will be taking you through this, and she's an expert on those meds, so she's going to do a great job. Stick around.